Right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this morning's Cabinet meeting. And apologies that I'm not on camera, but I'm only over here to the side of the room. The first item on the agenda is to receive apologies for absence. I don't think we've got anything for House. Yeah. So the minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of March. First of all, were there any questions or points on the minutes? Okay, well, I'm happy that they are proposed, seconded by Lucy, and I presume all in favour. Yeah, okay, thank you. Public questions and statements. We don't have any public questions or statements. Thank you. Item 4 is declarations of interest. Lucy.
Yep, just in relation to item 8, I'm part of the Phoenix Group and we received a grant from Nourishing Norfolk for a community supermarket.
Okay, thank you. Were there any others? No. Okay, fantastic. I don't believe we've got any items of urgent business, member questions. I think we're okay for now. Okay, item 7, recommendations from Overview and Scrutiny Committee, which of course hasn't met yet. I don't know if we've got Nigel in the room, it doesn't appear so. Yeah, okay, thank you. Item 8 is a verbal update on the Nourishing Norfolk programme. So following the previous announcements and our cost of living summit, of course, I'm pleased to announce we are releasing the funding for the continued development of food hubs in North Norfolk. This contribution from North Norfolk District Council will amount to £60,000. We will, of course, be seeking relatively frequent updates on the progress of the Nourishing Norfolk programme in the district area itself to monitor the use of this funding. Facilities are already open, of course, in Wells and recently opened in Sheringham at the Salvation Army Citadel. And I believe North Walsham won't be far behind. Cromer will likely be next, and of course they are scoping a project in Stalham. So some very good progress in the delivery of the Nourishing Norfolk programme by the Norfolk Community Foundation, but we will obviously want to keep a close eye on what's happening. I don't know if any members have any questions on this or if there's anything else you want to cover. Wendy, go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning, members. Good morning, officers and members of the public. Thank you so much for bringing this forward. I'm just wondering if this is just a one-off payment or is it going to be a reoccurring? Thank you.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So it's just a one-off payment to start the provision, after which it will need to become self-sustaining in those locations, as it has done so far. In Wells, of course, there are struggles, particularly with stock of food, but that isn't something we envisage taking any further ongoing responsibility for. But obviously, we might want to pay quite close attention to what's going on in light of the cost of living pressures, inflation pressures, and observing, I suppose, just the level of general usage of those new facilities for residents. Of course, in Wells, it's actually a mobile provision. It's in a old food supermarket delivery van. But I believe in the other locations, it's almost certain to be a static provision. In the case of Sheringham, it's a converted shipping container which has been cladded, and that will probably be the model that exists in the other localities. Okay, anything else on that? No. Item 9, temporary letting accommodation and the government consultation. This was sort of sprung upon us, really. We weren't made aware, unfortunately, of the government consultation. Andrew, I don't know if you wanted to say anything to introduce this item. Link.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good morning to everyone. Yeah, this is a consultation which has sort of crept upon us really over the electoral period. but we have done our due diligence on it, and I thank the officers for preparing a response to what I think is a long overdue consultation from the government. Rather curious title to give it temporary accommodation when really it's in reference to short-term holiday lets and second homes registration. We at the moment have a rather disparate system for identifying second homes or non-primary homes in the district. We use various sources, council tax records, waste collection records to identify non-primary properties. So a registration scheme is quite welcome. It will be able to assist us in our planning for housing in the district, and also to identify where our highest concentrations of second properties are. We do have a pretty good database of information currently, thanks to our housing team putting some statistics together for us to keep us informed. Rather curious that it doesn't really extend to second homes as regards change of use planning. Rather curious that you could say it's a cheap option to roll out a permitted development system across the country, because of course that most of the country doesn't have the density of second homes or holiday lets that we have here in North Norfolk. So I'm sure economies of scale have come into the thinking of government on that particular issue. But nevertheless, it's welcome. I suspect the outcome of the consultation will probably land on the desk of the next government, however, given the length of time it's taken to come to us at this stage in the parliamentary cycle. But at this stage, I'd like to propose it. At this stage, I'd like to hand over to the Planning Policy Manager, Mr. Ashwell, who may want to comment on what I've just said. Over to you, Matt.
So I'm not going to say a great deal. I'm going to rely on the written report. Essentially, there are two proposals which are related to each other here. One is the registration schemes. That's registering basically holiday accommodation, Airbnb, those type of premises. I think generally we're broadly supportive of that. And the second set of proposals, which are complementary, is introducing new change of use requirements. So planning permission would be required for some types of holiday accommodation. I'm going to slightly contradict Andrew in a way that what's disappointing about this consultation is it largely fudges or sidesteps the issue of second homes. And I think in the response, it's important that we note that and make that our disquiet sort of known. It's called temporary letting accommodation. And if you've got a second home and you don't let it, you just use it for your private purposes. It's not made available for letting purposes at all. It would sit entirely outside both the registration scheme and the need for planning permission. And I think that's a glaring sort of loophole that probably needs closing at some point. I've been unable to find out whether that's deliberate on government's behalf, whether they intend to consult further later on in relation to second home issues. They did make a commitment to do that in the Levelling Up Regeneration Bill discussions early in the year. So we may well see a separate targeted consultation on second home issues. But broadly, introducing registration and giving us some tools to manage the proportion of holiday lets in parts of the district. It's got to be a welcome thing and we should broadly support it. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Andrew. But just to be clear, they are looking at introducing planning permission for short-term accommodation, but want to consider allowing this under permitted development without conditions. Have I understood that correctly? Without, of course, the Article 4 direction.
Yeah, it's So what government is doing, it's altering the use classes order to say that using a property for temporary letting accommodation requires change of use. It would need a planning permission, but then going on as a second step and introducing a national planning consent, a permitted development right to change the use of a property from a permanent property to temporary letting accommodation. So it would appear on the one hand you need planning permission, but on the second hand government is granting an automatic planning permission for the thing they've just told you needs planning consent.
Yeah.
And the mechanism which local authorities would have to go through in order to secure control would be to serve an Article 4 direction which removes the permitted development allowance that government has granted. So a very complicated sort of process. And we say in the response, don't do that, just introduce a need for planning permission, end of.
Yeah.
You don't need this complicated Article 4 direction sort of mechanism, which would require local authorities to define an area, serve a notice, go through a consultation exercise. Quite a lot of work would be involved in going through that process. Just go through the straightforward route of introducing a need for planning permission for change of use for a property. The case is made in the consultation that these things have effects on individuals, amenity impacts. They have effects in terms of the loss of primary accommodation. Just do it in a straightforward way, regulate it, introduce a need for planning permission, and then let local authorities determine whether they grant those permissions or not. And, if we didn't have an issue in this area, we'd be broadly supportive. I suspect we do have an issue in this area, and in some cases we'd want to refuse permission for perfectly good, sound land use reasons. What the response is saying is leave that discretion with the local authority to determine how they manage these things on a local level.
Thank you, Mark. Yes, recognise what you also said about the second homes and how they've sort of sidestepped the issue. I suppose it's worth saying as well, I do recognise the value in holiday lets and what they bring to the local economy, but also recognise the impacts that we've seen as a result of significant proliferation of them. But just going back to what we were saying there along the same thread, is there really value in this without additional planning policies in the national planning policy framework to set a locally controlled ceiling on the number of holiday lets? Because I presume you can probably do that under an Article 4 direction, but I don't know how it applies in this situation. Will we actually have planning policies to be able to reject a proposal for new accommodation, if not set a ceiling on the numbers? A locally controlled number, I think, is the key, because different communities will of course want different things around the country. Sorry for the noise disruption. Thank you.
I think that's right, Tim. So it's two stages. The first thing is to make the argument that the control should be exercised locally through the need for planning permission. And the second thing is then to determine how you will exercise those controls through an appropriate planning policy. So at some point, either very late on in the current local plan through the examination process, or more likely through a review of the local plan, you're going to have to scratch your heads and think about what policies would you apply to proposals for change of use from dwellings to holiday lets. Is there a threshold? Where would you set the threshold? Is there a geographical distinction between some parts of the district and other parts of the district? And the case that we would make is those decisions should be made locally, not nationally. It's not a policy that should sit in the national planning policy framework. It's a policy that should be determined locally based on local evidence. And I think there may well be a case, and I think you'll need to think very carefully about it, for controls in the coastal strip of the district, in the AONB where the issue arises. There's probably a less compelling case or no case at all in other parts of the district where actually the percentage of second and holiday homes is pretty small. But you will want to think about, deflection of demand and supply. It's not and the benefits that holiday accommodation bring to the area is the other side of the equation. I don't know what the answer will be, but I think it's right that we should have the ability to set out a policy to control those impacts if we choose to. And that's what government's is essentially saying. We'll give you the tools, you make the decisions locally.
Thank you, Mark. And just to say thank you for your work here, and also that I personally agree with all the responses, but I just wanted to open out to, first of all, Harry is indicated.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I just want to say how I approve of you've chosen 30-day option rather than 60 or 90. I don't see any logic in the fact that you can have a field and have tents on it for 28 days, but you can't, but then you can have your house, room in your house free for 60 or 90 days. So I absolutely agree with your logic on that. Thank you very much.
Okay, anybody else? Wendy, go ahead.
Again, thank you, Mark, and also Housing Strategy for commenting on this. It seems to me it's just a very half-hearted attempt from central government to put something out into the public domain regarding holiday lets. Again, locally we need the tools to actually action this. We've got our housing strategy. We've got tools to do that, but again, it's just words from the government that don't actually mean very much. But thank you so much, Mark, and the housing strategy team.
Yeah, okay. Additional, anyone else want to speak? Okay, well, I'm very happy to propose the proposed responses to the consultation. Is that seconded by Andrew? Okay. And yes, thank you again. Can we take a vote of everyone in favour, please? Thank you, that's unanimous. Okay, item 10, managing performance for Q4 and cumulatively for the last financial year. Good progress towards meeting objectives again in the last quarter. The industrial dispute between Serco and Unison has now been resolved, and focus in this area clearly now is on service improvement, carbon reduction, and of course, revenue growth. All these distractions, right? Sorry about that. And Serco response times to phone calls have actually improved a great deal since it was last spoken of at Overview and Scrutiny. So some significant change there. I understand we presently have around 65 households in temporary accommodation. So you can see those numbers are remaining stubbornly high during this housing crisis. The works in North Walsham town centre, of course, have been completed ahead of schedule, and we now look forward to the completion of the works at the Cedars, the new public toilets, and of course the works commencing on the Lokes. No adverse ombudsman complaint decisions in 22-23, which of course is welcome, and work is underway already on the next carbon busting project, which received planning permission in the last quarter, and of course work towards the Sea Defence schemes. A lot of work towards realising various building and refurbishment projects in the district during the last quarter, which is, you know, something we've seen again and again in these reports, so it's very welcome. And I'm pleased to see continued funding for the community connectors has been highlighted specifically in the report. These people and the work they are doing has been, you know, so very well received. And finally, I just wanted to mention, and you can see it during the appendix, the planning performance, which, you know, I really just feel has been exemplary, you know, throughout much of this these last 4 quarters, but it really does show in this final report, which I am very happy to endorse. Were there any questions or anyone else that wanted to speak on this item? No. Any indications? Okay, so I'm happy to again propose. Is that seconded by Wendy? Take a vote of all those in favour to accept the report. Thank you. Right, thank you. Item 11, purchase of two, thank you, Dave, of two additional refuse collection vehicles, which has obviously come to us as a result of the increased demand for garden and trade waste, but there's scope for handling a bit more of the domestic capacity as well. Callum, did you want to say anything to introduce this item? Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Tim. Good morning, everybody. So this report seeks essentially to bolster our ability to provide trade and garden waste, and is a response largely due to significant growth in that areas in recent years. It's due to be funded by a combination of borrowing, residual capital budget from the original purchase of buildings, and a revenue contribution. Largely that comes from performance deduction failures for the year 21-22. Overall, the total also contains a buffer for inflationary pressure. We are, if this is approved, we'll be due to use Serco's pre-allocated build slots, which will hopefully minimise the risk of too much of that. And if we do use their pre-allocated build slots, we should have these vehicles by the end of the year, rather than what would basically be next summer or autumn, if we were to just not use those. And I will seek a little bit more advice from officers, perhaps a little bit of more clarity on the financials just at the conclusion of what I've got to say. Although this isn't designated to or designed to improve on domestic capacity specifically, one of the spin-offs of this will be that it is likely to remove trade waste from some of the domestic routes. So there is a combination of those in certain areas. That obviously has an increase in the likelihood of crews running over in time, lorries becoming full and needing to empty sooner. And so hopefully that the risks to domestic misses, which have been an issue, should be reduced as a side effect of this. There is still a little bit of uncertainty about the emissions reductions from this, and this largely is as a result of uncertainty over the sourcing of the HVO fuel. Hopefully, by the time that we take receipt of these vehicles, if approved, we should have been successful, hopefully, in our sources to attempt HVO from more ethical means. This has been complicated by factors such as the war in Ukraine. So that's a sort of this in a nutshell, but I'll ask officers just to elaborate on that, if I may.
Of course, thank you, Callum. And it would be remiss of me not just congratulate you on introducing your first cabinet report as a cabinet member. So thank you for that. Scott, I don't know if you wanted to say anything. You're standing in for Steve Hems today, and thank you. You're very welcome, and thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Tim. In terms of the HVO fuel, yes, we are in dialogue with Serco over what can be done with that. There's quite a price premium, we understand, at the moment, about 30p per litre in addition to diesel. But the vehicles are fully capable of converting over or running on that with no additional conversion costs if that becomes available. We also did look at options around electric vehicles, but unfortunately the range on those vehicles is just not suitable for the large rural area that is North Norfolk currently. Was there any other questions anybody had or
indications, please, members? I've got Christopher first, and then I'll come to yourself, Lucy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When we go through the annual budget setting process, I'm assuming that you go around all departments asking what you're likely to need money for in the coming financial year. So a question I have is, why wasn't this identified as part of the annual budget setting process given, and in district terms, that's quite a large amount of money?
answer.
We did ask for capital bids for the scheme. I don't know the reason why, but it wasn't put forward. Maybe at the time it wasn't realised that we were at that capacity level and we needed the extra vehicles. And it's now that summer's come along that we've realised that we actually need the extra capacity. And it would be the right time to go ahead and order them in view of the fact that it's such a long lead-in time until we get them.
So I understand that current trends, the garden waste collection accounts are increasing by approximately 800 a year. Is not that much? 1,500 a year. Okay, so well, I was significantly out there. Thank you, Scott. Which is obviously significant. Trade waste demand is still increasing as well, which of course, you know, I suppose demonstrates the strength of the local economy, despite all of the challenges. So obviously we will need to increase capacity to deal with this demand. I think I saw an indication from Lucy.
Yeah, thank you. And Councillor Cushin, I welcome that question. Because obviously it's not something that we generally would do mid-year or even at the start of a year is look to find that much money straight away. I've got a number of questions. So at 2.3, the price is being valid for a limited time. What is a limited time? So that we can have a little bit more information on that. 2.6, where we've got the 200,000 per year for garden waste, the 500,000 that is for commercial waste, is that over the last 4 to 5 years or is that annually? It's not quite clear. It's a little bit conflicting with the previous line. 3.1, doing nothing resulting in a deteriorating service. We don't have a timeline for that. We don't know when we'll begin to see that. And if we've got 12 to 15 months lead-in time, does that then suggest that the level of service will deteriorate before we receive our new vehicles? 11.1, how are we actually estimating demand if we are now at capacity with the 12 to 15 months lead-in time for the new vehicles? This is a little bit concerning because I don't think that this is a surprise to anybody. And if it is a surprise, then I'm not particularly very happy at such a large financial surprise or a service surprise. And 11.2, which financial year would we estimate that borrowing would land in? And I'm not sure whether or not we've got a strong enough case that borrowing is the answer within this report, because we don't seem to have any other option apart from borrow with haste. So if I can get some answers to those questions, that'd be helpful.
Certainly, the quotes are usually valid for, I think, a month or 2 months. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head right now what the length of those quotes is, but we have obviously built in a bit of contingency into that budget request. To put that into perspective, when we ordered very similar vehicles back in 2020, they were approximately £50,000 less than they are at current quote levels. So that's why we've built in a bit of additional contingency there. For 2.6, so the £500,000 is a total budget change from, sort of 4 or 5 years ago. So it's not an annual increase. That is the total increase over that time period. Whereas, yes, the garden one is expressed as annual future, what we've had annually from the new customer subscriptions for that period. 3 point. So Serco are currently providing some additional vehicles. This has been somewhat wrapped up with their round reorganisation process. I think what's gone on recently with service reliability gives some indication as to how effective that round reorganisation has been. So Serco have obviously borne the costs for those additional vehicles. due to that process, and they are looking to undertake a similar process but on a lower or on a smaller scale later this year, which will involve the garden waste service as well. The garden waste was not included in the original round reorganisation that went through last September. It was planned to take place earlier this year. And that's sort of coming back to Christopher's question, I suppose in some respects, that's why this is going through now. They had not undertaken the review of the garden waste rounds at that point to allow us to put capital bid in last year.
Sorry, Lucy, you asked another question. I caught the one about 11.2 about the borrowing, but you asked one before that. And I didn't catch that one.
It was about demand estimation if we've now hit capacity and we've still got a year to a year and a half to wait for vehicles. But just touching back on something Scott just said, the reorganisation was supposed to streamline the service and make it more environmentally friendly in terms of vehicle usage. But if the reorg means that we now need 2 vehicles, I'm not convinced that the reorg of garden services won't result in needing additional vehicles. So I'm not sure if I've misunderstood a little bit there, but it doesn't seem to fit very well.
So the requirement for the additional vehicles is down to customer growth. I don't think you can expect to service a greater number of customers on the scale that we have now with the same or fewer vehicles. So unfortunately, in some respects, an increase in vehicle emissions from a greater customer base is a byproduct of that. Yeah, in terms of the reliability of the service, Serco made some assumptions, I suppose, around what their capacity would be to service some of the commercial waste on the domestic rounds, as has always been done in North Norfolk, really, again, because of our geography. That is partly probably what hasn't worked for Serco, that they have tried to do as much of it as they can on the domestic rounds, which has caused some of those reliability issues. And in terms of losing customers, in a number of cases, we have already lost customers because of that service reliability. So the longer we delay taking this decision, the likelihood of that increases.
And then with regard to borrowing, we would take the borrowing the year after we pay for the vehicles. It's the year after the acquisition or build, purchase of vehicles in this case. We would look to borrow internally, in which case we wouldn't actually take any PWE borrowing. The reason for taking borrowing and not considering any other option is I think that was a decision that's been previously taken by the council. That was how we purchased our other vehicles when we started up the contract, and we would continue along the same route with these vehicles because we're making sufficient revenue from the vehicles to cover the borrowing costs.
Just a point of clarification then, is borrowing set for 24-25 or 25-26?
If we got the vehicles a year in December, that would make it 24-25, so it would start 25-26.
And can I ask one more question, Tim? Sorry. So it might be 2 questions, apologies. So we've seen the financial growth. We haven't got any information as to how much of that is due to increases in price versus increase in customers. And we don't really have an estimation of what we're projecting going forward in terms of increase of income. Whilst I understand the urgency, we're still missing a large part of the business case for this. And that's the bit that I'm struggling with. I'm not one for throwing money at something without understanding what we're going to get back in return. And apologies for that, Callum. I know this is your first paper.
In terms of as I said, the customer growth in the garden waste service has been around 1,500 per year for the last 3 to 4 years. For every 1,000 customers that join that service at roughly £50 per bin. Well, £50,000 there. In terms of trade waste, we operate in a competitive market. We have put the prices up this year for the first time in, it's for the second time in about 5 years, we've increased the prices. That price increase, I think, has also played into the loss of some of the customers. I think we've always been at a price premium compared to the private sector, but we've survived that due to the reliability of our service. Unfortunately, we've lost some of that reliability of the service recently, which has caused the loss of customers when we've got more expensive prices than others. I know that doesn't fully answer your question, Lucy, but
thank you. Good morning. I think this decision needs to be seen in the context of the council's service provision and the anticipated statement by government about waste strategy moving forward. Essentially, are we making a sound investment? Is the council's investment protected? And for both service delivery reasons, as outlined or shared with you by Scott, and what we anticipate is coming from the government in terms of waste collection services moving forward, and the lead-in time for this type of equipment, I believe that officers are of the mind that this is a sound investment at this time, and therefore the advice is that you should proceed. I think I can see Emily nodding as the assistant director for this service responsibility. I think, given the lead-in time and the fact that these vehicles will not be with us in the immediate term, it's right that the authority identifies its requirements moving forward. Otherwise, you do face, I think, some challenging service provision needs in the medium term.
Thank you, Chairman. Scott, I'm intrigued as to when Serco actually identified the need for these vehicles. I mean, they know the local authority budget cycle, so I presume this has come in since the budget setting took place in February. That's first concern. Second is more general. It basically comes down to, can the service be delivered without these vehicles? Thank you.
I'll take the second question first because it's quite an easy one. In my opinion, no, not reliably, not to the standard that we would expect and that we would need to retain the customers that we've currently got and continue to grow the service as we have done, or the services as we have done over the last few years. Serco have had instability in their local management, I would say, over the last 12 to 18 months. We're on our third senior contract manager in that time period, and different people have different views on what they want to do, what they can achieve. The vehicles, certainly on trade waste, the vehicle was probably first discussed over a year ago as being potentially required to continue the growth that we'd seen in the service. Unfortunately, it wasn't until, as you've suggested, we'd gone through the budget setting process that it was actually confirmed that, yes, for the carbon waste and commercial waste service, they felt that they needed, and we agreed with that assertion, that they needed 2 additional vehicles for those services to continue to operate with current levels of customers and projected growth for the future.
Thank you. I don't have much faith in the Serco management. You say we've had 3 managers since this contract started, and if they're constantly changing what they want, how can we be sure that what they're proposing is actually going to work?
We have, as I say, as officers, we have looked at this. We do have our own knowledge of what vehicles and crews are capable of, and I wouldn't be bringing the paper to you today if I didn't agree with what was being proposed.
Thank you. I have far more faith in your view than I do of anything Serco say to us.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Scott. I think we've appreciated your answers there. It's a lot of clarity. Andrew, go ahead.
Can I just ask if there's a reason why this didn't go to Government Risk and Audit Committee before it came here? And just on the question of interest, we know that we're in a climate of increasing interest rates. So is this quotation that, and I don't really see a figure on the interest that is being charged on the contract here in the report. So I don't know if it's baked in or whether it's excluded. And what mitigation would the current arrangement, if we go ahead with this, give against increased borrowing costs down the line in future years?
Currently, we would borrow if required, to take external borrowing at a rate of 5.09 is the current PWLB rate for an annuity loan, which is what we'd use here. We don't unfortunately know what it will be in, you know, a year's time or 2 years' time. It could go down as well as up, depending upon the economic situation. But we would hope that we would be able to manage it through internal borrowing anyway, in which case we wouldn't incur interest costs. So it would just be sort of an opportunity cost of lost investment income, but that would be less than we would pay out through borrowing. Current investment rates, I think, are at sort of 3 or 4%.
I think Scott said that the increased revenue from the additional demand would cover the cost of the borrowing quite comfortably. Is that right? If there was a cost to borrowing?
Yes, it would. Yeah. It is unfortunate in that you get to a point in a contract, you know, you have a certain number of customers, and then there's a, you know, it is a step change, isn't it? You either need another vehicle or you can manage your capacity, and it's such a huge step up, the cost of another vehicle. But I think we've got to the point where we need that extra vehicle, those 2 extra vehicles to meet the demands in capacity if we want to take the service forward.
And the reason why it didn't go to GRAC?
I don't think it's required to go to GRAC. Yeah.
I would have thought there's a risk. There's a risk to the authority here in financial terms. I'm surprised by that, to be perfectly honest.
If you wish for it to be referred to GRAC, it can go. There's a meeting scheduled for the 13th of this month, so next Tuesday. So if you wanted it to, if you wanted an opinion from GRAC at that meeting, it could be achieved on that date.
I would propose that. If I have a seconder.
Okay, Lucy, go ahead.
Just one more question. Obviously our fleet is shared across our council partners. It isn't. So all the branding that's got all the 3 councils on it for all the vehicles, is that just a shared partnership token? Because my question is, would our new vehicles be used in other districts, or does that come as part of the, okay, thank you.
The only vehicle that is shared across the 3 areas is used for clinical waste collections because it's such a small service. We wouldn't need a whole vehicle 5 days a week for that, nor would the other 2 councils. So we share that vehicle. The other vehicles we do have joint branding. Our vehicles have the grey cabs, Kings Lynn's have blue cabs, and Repton's have green cabs. They're all the same type of vehicles, but they are slightly different from one another, and not usually, unless there's sort of specific circumstances, they're not usually shared across the areas.
So just for clarity, we're not going to be propping up any other districts' demand with our new vehicles.
That is correct.
Okay.
Okay, so were there any other indications? Right, okay, so we've covered that quite exhaustively. So on the basis of the discussion, I'm happy to endorse the recommendation, subject to, of course, the item being discussed at GRAC, which was previously discussed. So with the inclusion of that, I'm happy to propose these are accepted as recommendations. Is that seconded, please? Yeah, thank you. And all of those in favour? Okay, fantastic. Item 12 is the North Norfolk. I've got my agenda order right. Bear with me, sorry for this. We've got the hydrogen study, item 12.
Stelham High Street Task Force
I
Chair.
thought I'd missed
Sorry.
that. Yeah, I couldn't think where it was in it yet. Sorry, I do apologise. I seem to have okay. So yes, the Stelham High Street Task Force. So I don't know if just permit me to say something briefly on this before perhaps I come to you yourself, Paul. I did attend the session. It's I think it's clear we need to foster partnership approach with the town council, businesses and community groups to identify local priorities. I think we've got to recognise we're still some way away from a defined project, but this is forging a path, and you know, certainly perhaps some easy wins can be realised along the way. So you know, welcome the work that was done here. Of course, we had the opportunity that we seized to invite the High Street Task Force representative consultant to come and visit Stelham, which I think was a useful session for everyone involved. And this is obviously the initial outcome of that work. So I'm happy to hand over, Paul, if you wanted to say something at this moment. Thank you.
Not a great deal to say, Chairman. We have the report from High Street's Task Force, which very clearly sets out the issues, in particular the need for more local capacity, leadership and partnerships, these being the barriers at the moment. And the important thing now is to bring those organisations together and to hopefully bring them to a shared view of what needs to be done in Stelham, at which point we can seek appropriate funding if such is available, which will always be the main difficulty. So it's basically take it forward. We've learned a lot from the North Horsham High Street Action Zone work, which can be applied to Stelham and to other towns in the district as we move forward. So I'm happy to endorse the recommendations as on the paper. Thank you.
Were there additional indications? Obviously, I think this is an interesting process to follow, really, from its beginning, and you know, I'll be keen to continue to follow and engage with it, and encourage other cabinet members to, of course, as well. I think the town council particularly has come an awful long way in Stelham over the past 2 or 3 years, and they're very engaged with this subject. And you know, encouraged to see the interest from the business community. So with that, to apologize, my agenda doesn't seem to include the item. So yeah, so I trust that the recommendations are to proceed on the basis as outlined in the report that I read previously, and nothing has changed. So Christopher, I've got an indication from yourself. Go ahead.
Well, I'd be just nice to obviously struggling to keep up with the agenda here, Mr. Chairman. So if you could, have you got a cite of that report that or copy of that report that could be distributed to me?
So I understand it was on the agenda pub, but not the, if you've got the paper agenda in front of us. Yeah. So I'm in the same position as yourself at the moment. I've obviously prepared reading the agenda published on the website, and I've come here and I don't have the report. I now have the report in front of me because Harry's helpfully put it there. So it is on the
it's on the web. Okay, so I'm on ModGov, that's fine.
Yeah. It's obviously an initial report, fairly high level, but I think it identifies a good starting position for Stelham. Obviously there's not, you know, a project already scoped out. I think there's certainly some stated ambitions, and I think I'm quite excited to explore those, to be honest. I think it would be a good thing for the town. I think one thing I would say for Stalham, it seems to be finding itself in terms of planning events and community sort of occasions. It's got good low levels of shop front vacancy, possibly even among the lowest in the district actually at the moment, which is fantastic. But I know, of course, it wants to find its sort of unique selling point, and it's I think we can do as much as we can to support the efforts, really. So yes, apologies, that's not within the paper report, but that's certainly there online. Harry, do you want to take that back? Okay, so yes, I'm happy to propose we accept the report. And sorry, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to say to add to this, Rob.
No, nothing. I think you said it all. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Happy to answer any questions.
Yeah. Were there any additional questions before we moved on? No. Okay. Thank you. So I'm happy to propose the recommendations and seconded by Harry. Sorry, Paul. And all of those in favour, please. Thank you. Okay, so I must have it correct that the next item is the North Norfolk hydrogen study. Okay, fantastic. So Paul, I don't know if you wanted to say something to introduce this item. Thank you.
Well, it is. We're all aware that of the importance of Bacton in national infrastructure terms and in providing a third of our natural gas throughput. The future of Bacton is likely, as we understand from a number of government reports and other agencies and companies, to continue to be an energy hub, particularly around the production of hydrogen. There is much in the press for and against hydrogen, but it is very clear that hydrogen will play a significant part in our energy requirements, in particular in replacing fossil fuels in some heavy industries and in improving particularly rail transport. There are hydrogen trains already running in Germany. There are some trials proposed in Scotland, I understand, which will enable the removal of the old diesel trains, which are heavily polluting. And given that road transport requires enormously heavy batteries to provide the power to move a load, you end up with more battery weight than you do in payload on it. So hydrogen fuel cells or hydrogen fueled piston engines are a potential future there. So the demand is there. Bacton has the capacity initially, and slightly worryingly, I think, for production of blue hydrogen with some carbon capture, though I gather there is still some pollution issue, that some 20 to 30% of CO2 is still released to atmosphere when blue hydrogen is produced. However, the longer term proposals move to green hydrogen produced through brine electrolysis, which would be a fairly novel technique. So long term, this site is going to continue to be an integral part of North Norfolk industrial sector. Very high tech, significant employment at high levels, plus the usual maintenance staff. There are implications for us in terms of potential requirement for additional land. There will be concerns about storage of hydrogen. Most of those, like the arguments about 5G and Wi-Fi, are completely false. People actually read the science and not Facebook. So in order to understand the impact on ourselves, we do need a study, find out how we need to plan for the future development of this site, how it will impact on land, on the environment of the Bacton area in particular, but the other wider implications for the rest of Norfolk in terms of how it could be used to decarbonise some of our own functions. I mean, hydrogen-fueled fleet of refuse collection vehicles in the next round is highly attractive. I'll leave it at that point. Rob, do you want to come in?
Well, the report was by Mr. Blatchford. I'm happy to just sort of expand a bit that really this study is about the district council understanding better what the opportunities that the change in the function of Bacton will bring. So, you know, we need to get behind those opportunities. We need to understand what the impacts are and to be better prepared. I don't know, in the days when Bacton was identified as the site for you know, North Sea gas coming on shore, whether the local authority at that time was sort of prepared for it, but that's where we need to be. This is to some extent the future, and in many ways it's a relief to see that Bacton will continue to play a major part in supporting the economy of the district and helping the nation to become net zero. So I think it's, you know, it's important for us to understand more and for us to be prepared in accordance with that. I don't know whether Steve has anything further to add.
Just a bit of history there, Rob, for everybody else. I think it was Smallborough Rural District Council in those days. And there was considerable opposition to taking our lovely green fields on the cliff top for a gas terminal. Even more so when the gas pipes went in. And so I challenge people to know where those gas pipes are these days.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Was there anything you wanted to add at this stage?
No, I'm happy to take any questions. The report is the position of the authority at this time. So you don't have an informed position in respect of the Bacton gas terminal site, but many organisations and bodies are promoting the potential of the site to transfer from natural gas processing to hydrogen production. There is, as Councillor Heinrich has said, much lack of public understanding and awareness. There is some concerns obviously around the history of hydrogen and how it's been used, but obviously in 70 years, 100 years, the technology's moved on very significantly. What is being proposed through both the Capital Hydrogen and Hydrogen Valley proposals are that there would be large-scale hydrogen production at Bacton, and then there would be new national transmission pipeline infrastructure to both London and the West Midlands, particularly to as a fuel source for industry and commerce rather than domestic heating. And at this time, it's not suggested it would be used in local transport distribution. There are small scale hydrogen electrolysis proposals being considered or explored across the country for refuse freighters, and the most developed scheme in the UK is the Aberdeen Hydrogen Public Transport First Bus or Stagecoach bus fleet, which is well established. So these are proposals which have been made by a number of national bodies and companies that identify Bacton as a potential or the best potential to serve large-scale hydrogen use in, as I say, both the Midlands and London and the South East. But we don't know much more about those proposals in terms of their land take, their relationship with the local community and environment. So, and we don't have a lot of spare capacity in our planning or economic growth teams where there is specialist knowledge in this respect. So this report proposes that we commission a baseline report so we are informed of those opportunities, and we can then consider whether there's any need in the future for a specific policy officer or resource to work with those significant companies to coordinate any investment at Bacton. There is growing concern in the district around the impact of offshore wind energy, the multiple cables, etc., that come through the district. And we've had to resource those responses from within your existing planning service, the major developments team. So in terms of the consultations, although they are national strategic infrastructure projects and proposals, in terms of discharge of conditions, particularly around highways, landscape ecology, restoration of hedgerows, etc. in the medium term. All of that has to be borne and carried by the district council in terms of representing our local communities, and this paper seeks to get in front of that in respect of any developments at Bacton which are proposed for hydrogen. I think it's important to say that if decisions were made in the next 24 months around this technology, it would be 7, 8, 10 years before those investments came on stream at the Bacton site. So this is very much around future proofing and positioning at this time.
Okay, thank you. Adam, I've got your indication. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I just want to say thank you to Mr. Blatch for his engagement on this matter. I just think it's so important, and I think it's quite clear that the long-term benefits of this project would be vast. NNDC is committed to the climate change matter, and we are striving towards net zero locally, and of course nationally there is the pledge towards net zero. This would certainly be an ambitious project which would enable North Norfolk to lead the way on sustainable renewable energy and be the hub for most of the UK's energy provision. I think the environmental aspects are great, and this would provide green jobs. I think it's quite clear at this stage we don't know enough about this, so I very much welcome this further report, and I'm more than happy to propose or second this. Thank you.
Thank you. So obviously, yeah, I think the key here is to understanding the challenges and opportunities that exist over quite a long period of time. But obviously, we're very keen to realise a positive impact for Norfolk as a whole, really. Certainly in terms of the retention of jobs at the site, but of course, if possible, understanding the possibility of direct benefits to the district in terms of industry, transport, and the hope, of course, that those sort of benefits won't bypass us. As we've heard, I think it can be could potentially be a significant part of our energy or fuel mix in the coming years, and certainly we need to understand this before events potentially overtake us. I think that's a real possibility. You know, you could start to see proposals emerge, and I think we need to understand all the implications and get ahead of that. So we've obviously had a proposal, I believe, from Adam, and it was remiss of me as well not to congratulate Paul on his first and now second items as a new cabinet member. So that's proposed by Adam, is seconded by yourself, Paul. Sorry, remiss of me. Were there any further questions before we went to the recommendations? Okay, so a vote of all of those in favour, please. Yeah, that's unanimous. Thank you. Okay. Unless I'm mistaken, the next item is the inclusion of press and public, which we do not need to do, and there's no private business. So thank you everyone for your attendance at today's